In the dusty streets of Ketu, Lagos, where dreams either grow wings or die quietly in alleys, a mystery strolled daily under the watchful eyes of the people, a billionaire, known for his silent fortune and piercing gaze, who walked everywhere. No convoy. No chauffeur. No sleek car. Just dusty slippers, a threadbare shirt, and a walking stick that clicked with a rhythm as if time itself obeyed his steps. The townspeople whispered. Children mocked. The wealthy scoffed. Why would a man worth billions trek under the blistering sun like a beggar? Why walk when you can glide? What secret did those steady footsteps hide? If only they knew. Chief Colonel Adegbite wasn't born into wealth. He carved it from the unforgiving bones of life. The story began in 1976 in Ilesha, Osun State, where his mother sold puff-puff by the roadside, and his father, a chronic gambler, vanished before Colonel's 6th birthday. By 15, Colonel was hawking water in traffic, dodging insults and clutching coins like prayers. He watched the big men in their polished jeeps, their windows sealed to the world's struggle. He wanted to be like them, no, better than them. But not for comfort. For power. Power to silence those who ever looked down on him. 20 years later, the name Adegbite Holdings echoed in banking halls, real estate empires, and oil blocks. Colonel became a name that bowed shoulders. Forbes listed him. Politicians quoted him. But while his peers flaunted jets and bulletproof SUVs, Colonel did something curious. He sold off his luxury fleet in 2011 and never bought another car. At first, the public assumed he was just eccentric. Then rumors began, was he going broke? Was it an environmental cause? A health scare? Something spiritual? The man himself never answered. He just walked. In crisp native wear or faded clothes, sometimes barefoot. Always alone. Always watching. No one questioned him directly, except one person. Her name was Miriam. She was a student journalist at the University of Lagos, fresh-faced, fearless, and fueled by something more than curiosity. She had seen him walking along Herbert Macaulay Way one Tuesday, the sun dipping low behind him like a painting. His feet were coated with dust, but his posture was regal. The next day, Miriam began her quest to uncover the truth. She combed archives, talked to former staff, street hawkers, anyone who ever interacted with the man. The patterns were strange. Every place he walked to, market corners, broken neighborhoods, abandoned schools, had one thing in common: tragedy. In Ajiganol, she discovered that he visited a dilapidated house where, years ago, a young girl had died in a collapsed building. In Mushin, he lingered by a street notorious for gang violence. In Ikoyi, he stood at a bus stop that had no relevance, until she found a decades-old report about a fatal accident involving a young teacher and a black Mercedes-Benz. What was he searching for? One afternoon, driven by the pull of the story, Miriam trailed him discreetly through the crowded Oshodi market. He was slower than usual, limping slightly, face grim. He stopped beside an old woman frying akara, bought one ball, handed her a crisp N1000 note, and walked away without collecting change. That night, Miriam wrote in her journal, "He walks not for fitness. He walks to remember." But Colonel's story, his real story, was hidden in 1989, a story no newspaper ever touched, a secret too dark for even his billions to silence. Back then, Colonel was just starting out, managing a taxi service with a few borrowed cars. One night, on his way to sign a deal with a foreign investor, he got into a heated argument with his driver. The man, weary and underpaid, refused to continue unless Colonel treated him better. Infuriated and prideful, Colonel grabbed the steering wheel and told the man to get out. "I don't need you," he spat. That decision changed everything. Minutes later, speeding through Third Mainland Bridge with a storm raging over the city, Colonel lost control. He swerved to avoid hitting a stranded car and rammed into a roadside fruit seller. A woman. She died on impact. There were no street cameras back then. No witnesses. Only the sound of rain and the haunting image of her broken body burned into his mind. Colonel panicked. He reversed, drove off, and buried the car deep in a friend's scrapyard that night. He bribed his way out of the damage claims, told no one the truth. But the guilt never left. Her name was Adani. She was a widow, mother of two, who came to Lagos for a better life. Every fruit she sold put a little food in her children's mouths. Her death barely made news. One column. No photo. Years later, when his fortune rose and his fame grew, Colonel started walking. The route always led back to places tied to people he failed, hurt, or ignored. But it was never enough. As Miriam dug deeper, she noticed a pattern in his footsteps. He walked in spirals, as if trying to trap something in his memory or release something from it. A man who could afford to forget, yet chose to remember. One day, Miriam gathered the courage to approach him as he sat under a mango tree near Bariga. She offered him water. He looked at her, his eyes heavy, ancient. "You want to ask why I walk," he said without prompting. She nodded. He smiled faintly. "Because the car I once drove buried a life I can never resurrect." Miriam froze. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "When you lose your soul to comfort, you walk to remember you once had one." And just like that, he walked away, his stick tapping the earth like a heartbeat. Chief Colonel Adegbite's confession haunted Miriam. Not because he killed someone Lagos had seen worse, but because he remembered. In a city that moved too fast to care, where tragedies vanished in traffic and screams were drowned by horns, here was a man choosing to relive his worst sin with every footstep. After their brief encounter, Colonel disappeared for days. Miriam checked every usual route, Yaba, Surele, even the old railway tracks at Ajij, but the old man was gone. In his absence, her obsession deepened. She wasn't just chasing a story anymore. She was walking a path of revelation. She visited Adani's final resting place, an unmarked grave in a public cemetery where names were luxury. An old gravedigger remembered her. "Nice woman," he said, "didn't deserve the death she got." The police didn't even return her fruit tray. Miriam stood by the grave for hours. That night, she penned her article, "The Billionaire Who Walks to Remember." She didn't name him. She didn't need to. The story exploded online. Some called it a hoax. Others claimed they had seen the same man, always walking, always alone. The mystery deepened. But Chief Colonel. He resurfaced at the annual Lagos Philanthropy Summit. Wearing a simple brown agbada, he walked past packed Rolls-Royces, ignored handshakes, and entered the conference hall barefoot. Gasps followed him. Phones flashed. Some laughed. But then, he walked to the podium. What followed was not a speech. It was a reckoning. "I've donated billions," he began, his voice calm. "Built hospitals. Funded orphanages. Paid tuition for strangers. Yet, no matter how far I walk, I can't leave behind the woman I killed." Silence gripped the hall. "They call me eccentric. I let them. But let me be clear, I walk because once, I drove over a life and sped away. And I will never let comfort erase that memory." Cameras captured tears. Politicians shifted uncomfortably. But no one interrupted. "I tell you this," he continued, "not to inspire pity, but to warn you, money cannot wash blood from conscience. And guilt is a road with no shortcuts." That night, the story was no longer a whisper. It became legend. What the world didn't know was that Colonel had made a list of every person his rise had crushed. Not just Adani. There was Yusuf, a young apprentice he fired for stealing who later died by suicide. Bose, a secretary he humiliated in public. A family he evicted with police force. A business partner he ruined out of envy. He didn't walk aimlessly. Every route was a pilgrimage. Each day, he visited a name on that list. Sometimes he sat in silence near their last known address. Other times, he paid their families' debts anonymously. But he never forgot their faces. Never allowed himself peace. He called it the penance path. One evening, Colonel returned to a small compound in Aja. There, a blind boy sat beside his aging mother, selling roasted corn. The boy's father had once been Colonel's driver, yes, that driver, the man he had kicked out of the car moments before Adani's death. The man had died 2 years after, stabbed in a bus park scuffle. The family never recovered. Colonel approached quietly and dropped an envelope by the mother's feet. "What is this?" she asked, sensing someone near. "Justice, in the only form I can offer," he replied. She opened it after he left. Inside was a title deed, a bank check, and a letter simply signed, "Forgive me." Meanwhile, Miriam's professor at UNILAG got wind of her article. She was offered a scholarship to study investigative journalism in Ghana. But she hesitated. Something about the story wasn't finished. She wanted to know what keeps a man walking even after he has confessed. She met Colonel again at dawn, near a rundown bridge in Ikoredu. "Sir," she said gently, "you've done so much. Given back, confessed publicly. Why keep walking?" He paused, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "Because forgiveness is a luxury I don't deserve. I walk because it's the only thing I can still do for them." Miriam's throat tightened. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what walking teaches you? That progress isn't always speed. Sometimes, it's humility. Sometimes, it's retracing your steps so you never forget where you lost your soul." But Lagos is not a city that remembers. 1 week later, a trending video showed Colonel being mocked by a group of young men. They filmed him walking past Lekki Phase 1, yelling, "Na so billionaires dey waka now. Oga, by car now. Shame they catch us oh." He said nothing. Just kept walking. But one of those boys, Fola, followed him out of mischief. Then curiosity. Then, silence. By the time they reached a children's hospital in Makoko that Colonel had built from scratch, Fola's face had changed. He watched as the old man sat by the gate, smiled at the children, and handed out pencils. "Why do you do all this, sir?" Fola asked. Colonel looked at him, tired but kind. "Because I once destroyed a life. Now, I try to rebuild others before mine ends." Fola dropped his phone. The laughter died. Back in her dorm room, Miriam read the final interview transcript and wept. This wasn't a story about a billionaire. It was a story about grief and redemption. She wrote her final line. "In a world obsessed with moving fast, he chose to slow down. To walk with ghosts. To carry the weight his wallet could not lift. The city of Lagos never stops. It forgets too quickly. It forgives too slowly." But it noticed when, for an entire week, Chief Colonel Adegbite didn't appear on his usual walking routes. The old man who had once walked from Oshodi to Aja barefoot, who spoke softly yet carried the weight of broken souls, had vanished. Rumors began again. Some said he had died. Others claimed he had moved abroad. One blogger insisted he was arrested for fraud. But Miriam knew better. She had seen the way his body trembled the last time they spoke, how the cough lingered just a second too long, how his footsteps grew weaker. The truth came in the form of a small newspaper obituary. Hidden on page 9. Sandwiched between real estate ads and celebrity gossip. Chief Colonel Adegbite, aged 68. Father to none. Mentor to many. A philanthropist who believed in walking the hard road. Passed away quietly at home. No public funeral. No state honors. Just a quiet burial in a modest grave near Elupaju. It rained that day. As if the skies mourned what the city could not understand. But Colonel had left behind something more powerful than money. A legacy of reflection. Mariam, now on scholarship in Ghana, returned to Lagos for one purpose, to finish his story. But what she found next was far beyond journalism. A letter. It arrived at her hostel, addressed in elegant cursive, sealed with red wax. It read, "Dear Mariam, you are the only one who ever asked the right questions. The only one who saw my feet, not just my fortune. I watched you as you tried to piece together my life, hoping someone like you would come along before the end. I'm tired now. My body gave up long before my conscience did. But I have one last favor to ask. In the drawer of my study, behind a stack of old journals, there is a brown envelope. It contains the deeds to properties I built in memory of the people I failed, Dadani, Yusuf, and more. There's also a map. It shows my final planned work. I couldn't complete it. Maybe you can. Not by feet. But by telling their stories. Let the world know what Lagos forgets. That power is not in what we drive, but what we do with the roads we travel. Sincerely, Colonel Adegbite." Mariam's hands trembled. She wiped away tears, staring at the worn map sketched by hand. It traced through Ajiganol, Makoko, Ape, and finally to Ilesha, his hometown. She made the journey. Not walking, but stopping at each location. Speaking with the people Colonel had helped. A teenage girl whose tuition was paid anonymously. A widow whose rent had been settled by a man who only said, "It's a debt owed to the past." A retired teacher in Ilesha who said Colonel once returned to apologize for never thanking her for her kindness when he was just a boy with no shoes. One final stop remained, a crumbling house with peeling paint and a plaque that read, "The Adani Foundation, for women who lost too much too soon." Inside were young girls, some with babies, some alone, all smiling. They were learning to sew, bake, read. The matron told Mariam he built this place and never once let us take photos of him. He just said, "Make sure no girl here ever sells fruit on the roadside again." Mariam dropped to her knees. That night, she uploaded her final documentary titled The Billionaire Who Walked with Ghosts. It went viral in hours. But not for scandal. For soul. The video showed clips of dusty roads. Quiet homes. Forgotten corners of Lagos. And one voiceover line from Colonel's summit speech. "Money can buy cars, jets, even applause. But it cannot buy peace. For that, you walk until your footsteps match the rhythm of forgiveness." Conclusion. Months later, Lagos renamed a small bridge in Bariga. Colonel Adegbite Footbridge, in honor of the man who walked so others could heal. No marble statue. No traffic lights. Just a wooden plaque, and beside it, footprints carved into stone, his exact stride. And as for Mariam, she published a book, The Man Who Chose to Walk. It became a required text in journalism schools across West Africa. Not for its scoop, but for its humanity. In the final chapter, she wrote, "He didn't walk because he was poor. He walked because he once drove through someone's world like it didn't matter. And that's what haunts the privileged, when they realize their speed killed someone else's journey."